Welcome to Threads of Truth, a podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Picture the sound in your mind. Just really try to hear it. The stark, echoing ring of a late-night payphone cutting through the damp spring air.
Right.
It's nearing midnight. You're standing in the middle of a small, quiet, Midwestern town, the kind of agricultural community where, everybody knows everybody's vehicle. The concept of locking your front door feels like this lingering paranoia from the big city.
Yeah, a completely different era of safety.
Exactly. The quiet hum of an empty grocery store parking lot is the only sound, save for the voice of a young pregnant woman talking to her fiancé through a heavy plastic receiver. But then that stillness is broken by the low, rumbling idle of a two-tone green pickup truck.
And it's the kind of vehicle that inherently stands out, even in the heavy darkness of a rural parking lot. And yet, it begins to circle the perimeter, slowly, deliberately, like a shark assessing the water.
Imagine the mounting dread as she describes to her fiancé this stranger circling her over and over. Then the truck stops. A man gets out. He's searching the ground with a flashlight, getting closer and closer. And then comes the horrific climax of that phone call.
The part that it chills you to the bone.
A sudden, piercing scream, the chaotic sounds of a desperate physical struggle, and then a man's cold, dispassionate voice coming through the receiver saying, "I didn't need to use the phone anyway." The line goes completely dead. Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, we have a case that will entirely dismantle any lingering sense of security you have about the quiet moments in your life.
It really does. Because some cases stick with you because of the forensic complexity, but this one lodges itself in your brain because of the sheer raw terror of how quickly everyday life turns into an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, it's a profound, terrifying narrative. To be on the other end of an audio connection, completely helpless as the person you love is violently taken from the world, it's an unimaginable psychological horror.
We are looking at an event that has baffled state and federal law enforcement, haunted a tight-knit community, and spawned over 3 decades of intense, constantly evolving analysis.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to walk through the devastating 1991 abduction of 20-year-old Angela Hammond in Clinton, Missouri. We're pulling from an immense stack of sources to give you the full picture here.
Right, because the material on this is incredibly dense.
It is. We are going to examine the harrowing original witness accounts, the sprawling multi-state police investigations, the modern 2026 forensic and digital updates, and these incredibly complex theories that involve everything from prolific interstate serial killers to a catastrophic case of mistaken identity.
To truly process the weight of this event, you have to immerse yourself in the specific context of the era and the life of the victim. We're talking about Angela Marie Hammond, known to her family and friends as Angie.
Born in February 1971.
Exactly. She was a vibrant 20-year-old by the spring of 1991. She was 4 months pregnant, possessed an incredibly energetic spirit, and was universally described as having a radiant, outgoing personality that really anchored her social circle.
She was right on the precipice of true adulthood, taking classes at Central Missouri State University, and she was engaged to her high school sweetheart, an 18-year-old named Rob Schaefer.
And by every metric we have in the source material, these two were deeply in love, entirely focused on their future.
They were living in a mobile home together, building the foundation for a family. Rob was working, and he had concrete plans to join the military later that year to secure health care and financial stability for his new family. He'd given her a diamond engagement ring, a symbol of a very serious, very grounded commitment for a couple so young.
Which is why the timeline of April 4, 1991 is so crucial to analyze. It was a Thursday, a completely unremarkable spring day in a tight-knit community.
That evening, Angie and Rob attended a family barbecue at her mother Marcia's home. It was a normal, happy gathering. Nothing out of the ordinary at all.
Afterward, Angie drove Rob over to his parents' house because he had a prior commitment. He needed to babysit his younger brother until his mother finished her shift at work.
Right. So after dropping Rob off, Angie decides to spend the rest of the evening hanging out with her best friend, Kyla. They drove around, enjoying the mild spring night. If you're trying to visualize this, you have to understand the specific geography and culture of Clinton, Missouri in 1991. This wasn't a sprawling metropolis.
Geography and demographics are vital here. Clinton sits in Henry County, often referred to as the gateway to the Ozarks. In 1991, the entire county had a population hovering around 20,000 people, with the town of Clinton itself holding maybe 5,000 or 6,000 residents.
It's small.
Very small. And the local culture was defined by a profound sense of insular safety. Teenagers cruised the town square. People left their keys in the ignition at the gas station. Using a public payphone in a well-lit grocery store parking lot at midnight simply wasn't categorized as a high-risk activity.
That is exactly what you did to communicate. If you were out and needed to check in, you found a payphone. So around 11:45 p.m., though some witness timelines suggest it might have been closer to 11:45 p.m., Angie pulled into the parking lot of the food barn.
Which locals also called the Safeway.
Right, the Safeway. This lot is located right in the center of town. Crucially, it is literally just 7 blocks away from Rob's parents' house. She parked her car, walked up to the brightly lit phone booth, and dialed Rob's number.
The intention of the call was completely benign. She was checking in to tell him she was feeling too fatigued from the pregnancy to go back out and meet up with him later on the town square, which had been their tentative plan.
She just wanted to let him know she was heading home to take a warm bath.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that they didn't have a landline installed in their mobile home yet. That was a very common economic reality for young couples starting out back then. So the payphone was their primary tether when they weren't physically together.
So they're on the phone having a quiet, winding down conversation. But as they're talking, Angie's situational awareness kicks in. She mentions to Rob that there is a truck circling the block.
And she doesn't just casually mention it. She provides a highly detailed real-time description.
She does. She identifies the vehicle as an older model pickup, likely a late 1960s or early 1970s Ford F-150. She notes the paint job, a distinct two-tone green.
She also describes a massive, highly specific defining characteristic. The back window of the truck cab is covered by a large perforated window decal. It's a mural depicting a water scene, specifically featuring a fish like a large bass jumping out of the water.
Which is so specific.
It is. For anyone familiar with automotive trends in the late 80s and early 90s, these decals were somewhat popular in rural areas. They reduced headlight glare from the vehicles behind you while still allowing the driver to see out. But more importantly for our analysis, a massive mural of a leaping fish makes the truck incredibly distinct. It's a rolling billboard.
And her powers of observation don't stop at the truck. She describes the driver to Rob. As the truck continues its slow, methodical circles, she tells Rob that the man behind the wheel is a filthy, bearded white man with a prominent mustache. He's wearing glasses, a dark baseball cap pulled low, and a pair of overalls.
Now, put yourself in her shoes. Even with this bizarre behavior, Angie and Rob aren't immediately terrified. They're just a bit unnerved. In a small town, you occasionally cross paths with eccentric, unkempt locals.
Right. But we need to look at the behavioral escalation here. The predatory sequence is textbook. The truck stops circling the perimeter. It pulls directly into the parking lot and parks right next to the phone booth where Angie is standing.
The man exits the vehicle, and his behavior instantly transitions from passive observation to active hunting.
He doesn't walk up to the adjacent phone to make a call.
No. Instead, he pulls out a flashlight and begins sweeping the beam across the dark asphalt, looking at the ground near his truck. He's creating a false pretense for his proximity. He's deliberately invading her physical space, assessing her vulnerability, and waiting for the right moment.
It's deeply unsettling to visualize. Angie, feeling the palpable tension and the sheer awkwardness of the situation, actually attempts to diffuse it by speaking to him. She asks the man if he needs to use the phone, perhaps assuming the other receiver is out of order.
The man replies no, saying he would try again in a minute. He just continues to stand there in the darkness, illuminated only by the harsh fluorescent light of the phone booth and the erratic beam of his flashlight.
Angie relays this entire interaction to Rob over the phone in real time. They keep talking, trying to maintain the facade of a normal conversation, but the environment has become highly volatile.
And then the critical moment arrives. Without any further warning, the casual conversation is violently interrupted. Rob hears a sudden, blood-curdling scream. He hears the distinct, chaotic sounds of a severe physical struggle.
The abductor then picks up the dangling receiver. He doesn't issue a threat to rob. He doesn't state his intentions or demand a ransom. He simply delivers one chilling, sociopathic line into the phone. I didn't need to use the phone anyway. And then the line goes dead.
Think about the psychological impact of that moment on an 18-year-old kid. Rob Schaefer is sitting in his parents' living room, and he has just auditorily witnessed the violent abduction of his pregnant fiancée.
The surge of adrenaline and absolute panic would be blinding. He doesn't even take the time to place the receiver back on the cradle. He drops it, sprints out the front door, throws himself into the driver's seat of his car, and floors the accelerator toward the town square.
This sequence of events is agonizing because of the geography. The grocery store parking lot is only 7 blocks away. Rob is rocketing down the quiet residential streets, desperate to intervene.
As he's racing toward the scene, he sees a set of headlights approaching rapidly from the opposite direction. A vehicle is fleeing the area of the town square. As it flashes past his car in the dark, his brain registers the vehicle profile. It is a two-tone green pickup truck.
And in that fleeting fraction of a second, as the two vehicles cross paths going in opposite directions, the true horror of the situation is realized. Through the open window of the speeding truck, Rob hears a voice tearing through the night air. It's Angie.
She screams, "Robbie!" directly out the window.
That single desperate cry is the last time he will ever hear her voice.
He is literally inches away from her. The reaction is instantaneous. Rob slams on his brakes, throws his steering wheel hard to execute a violent U-turn, and shifts his car into gear to pursue the truck. But in his state of absolute blinding panic, he makes a catastrophic mechanical error.
He throws the car from reverse into drive while the engine is still revving and the vehicle is moving backward. He hears a sickening metallic crunch from under the floorboards. He has fatally damaged his transmission.
I want to break down the mechanics of this because it's essential to understanding the tragedy. In a 1991 vehicle, if you drop an automatic transmission from reverse into drive under high RPMs, while the car's momentum is still carrying it backward, you are violently forcing the planetary gears and the torque converter to instantly reverse direction against immense physical resistance.
The sheer torque shears the metal gear teeth right off. The transmission doesn't just stall. It physically shatters internally.
Yet, despite the catastrophic internal damage, the car is still barely moving, running on sheer momentum and the last shreds of the gearing. Rob pushes the dying vehicle to its absolute limit. He chases the taillights of the green pickup truck through the dark streets of Clinton, heading out of town toward the rural expanse of Highway 7.
He manages to stay on the truck's tail for 2 agonizing miles. He gets close enough to see the tailgate, but the license plate is heavily obscured by a thick layer of mud and rural road dirt. The only identifying characters he can make out through the grime are the letters X and Y.
And then, the inevitable mechanical failure reaches its conclusion. As he attempts to make a right turn to stay with the suspect vehicle, his car completely gives out. The transmission ceases to function entirely.
The engine revs, but no power transfers to the wheels. The vehicle rolls to a dead stop.
Rob Shaver is left sitting in a broken car in the dead of night, utterly helpless, watching the red brake lights of the green Ford F-150 fade into the dust and the darkness, taking his fiancée and his unborn child away forever.
It's a moment of pure, unadulterated devastation. He's stranded on a dark country road. He eventually flags down a passing motorist who takes him directly to the police station.
He arrives in a state of absolute shock, covered in sweat, hyperventilating, reporting a kidnapping that had occurred merely 15 minutes prior.
This raises an important question. How does law enforcement initially process a frantic, significant other reporting an unbelievable crime? If you look at the statistical realities of criminology, the protocols are rigid.
Yeah, I have to be.
In the overwhelming majority of cases involving a missing pregnant woman, the perpetrator is the father of the child or the romantic partner. So when Rob bursts into the precinct with this wild narrative involving a mysterious green truck, a meticulously described stranger, and a real-time abduction over a payphone, he instantly, and understandably, becomes their prime suspect.
I know it sounds harsh to the listener, but you really can't blame the investigators for looking at the fiancé first. It's standard procedure. But here's where the physical, empirical evidence of that night speaks volumes and completely rewrites the initial police theory.
The investigators immediately dispatch units to the various scenes. They find Angie's car, abandoned exactly where Rob stated it would be, parked in the food barn lot right next to the phone booth.
And more critically, they go out to the rural road near Highway 7 where Rob said his pursuit ended. They find his disabled vehicle sitting exactly where he left it. And when police mechanics inspect the car, they confirm that the transmission is literally destroyed.
The internal gears are sheared, completely consistent with a panicked high-speed shift from reverse drive. The physical evidence completely corroborates the mechanical details of his narrative.
And it wasn't just the car. Independent witnesses begin to emerge from the woodwork. Other residents of Clinton who were out that night contact the police to report seeing a two-tone green pickup truck, specifically noting a large fish decal in the rear window, lurking in the exact grocery store parking lot where Angie was taken.
These independent, unprompted sightings validate the existence of the suspect vehicle, effectively neutralizing the theory that Rom fabricated the truck. Furthermore, he immediately volunteers for and easily passes a polygraph examination.
His grief is palpable to everyone involved. Even Angie's mother, Marcia, publicly and repeatedly stated that she never doubted Rob's innocence for a single second.
Within a matter of days, the Clinton Police Department, the Missouri State Highway Patrol, and eventually federal authorities realized they are hunting a phantom. But they are hunting a phantom driving a very specific, very loud, very green truck.
Logically, finding a late 1960s or early 1970s Ford F-150 with a massive mural of a jumping base covering the entire back window should be a straightforward task, especially in a rural county.
Put yourself in the shoes of those investigators in 1991. You have a massive lead. You coordinate with the Department of Motor Vehicles. You run a computer query of all registered vehicles in the state of Missouri matching that specific make, model, and color configuration.
They generate a printout of roughly 1,600 possible vehicles.
But we have to analyze what a database search meant in 1991. This wasn't a modern system where you click a button and pull up high-resolution photos of the vehicle and the owner's current GPS location.
No, they were dealing with green screen terminals and massive reams of dot matrix printouts. Investigators literally had to divide up the list and execute boots-on-the-ground police work.
They drove out to rural farms, knocked on doors, checked barns, and visually inspected hundreds of trucks. They utilized aircraft to scour the region from above, looking for green trucks hidden in tree lines or behind sheds.
And despite this massive, coordinated, multi-agency dragnet, they never found the truck. Not a trace of it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the complete disappearance of the truck forces us to evaluate a few chilling realities about the offender. In a county of 20,000 people, a vehicle with a massive fish mural is incredibly conspicuous.
It really is.
The fact that it vanished so completely suggests two primary profiles. First, the offender may have been a highly transient predator, a long-haul trucker, a drifter, or someone simply passing through on Highway 7 who saw a crime of opportunity, struck, and kept driving hundreds of miles out of state before the sun even came up. The truck vanished because it was never a local truck to begin with.
But let me play devil's advocate here. What if the killer was local but just incredibly organized and reactive? If the offender realized Rob had seen him, and if he saw the news broadcast the very next day detailing the specific fish decal and the two-tone paint job, he could have taken immediate countermeasures. A window decal can be peeled off with a razor blade in 10 minutes. A truck can be driven into a barn, sanded down, and repainted with primer over a weekend. Or, more darkly, it could be driven into a deep quarry or handed off to a rural salvage yard to be crushed into a cube of scrap metal.
That is a highly plausible counter-theory. A vehicle is only evidence if it remains intact and visible. The physical evidence vanished, but the narrative of the crime did not. The sheer, visceral terror of the story caught the attention of the national media.
The case was prominently featured on the television program Unsolved Mysteries, which broadcast the details to millions of homes and generated thousands of tips from across North America.
And that media exposure led to one incredibly fascinating, though ultimately unverified, sighting. In September of 1991, roughly 5 months after Angie was abducted, a man named Russell Smith came forward with a highly specific account.
But he wasn't in Missouri. He was in Selkirk, Manitoba, way up in Canada.
Right. He contacted authorities to claim he saw a young woman leaving a local drugstore, and he explicitly watched her get into a green pickup truck that featured a distinct mural of a fish jumping out of water on the rear windshield.
When Smith later saw a distributed missing persons poster for Angela Hammond, his conviction solidified. He told authorities, and I quote, "I know I saw that girl. I may not remember someone's name, but I never forget a face."
Now, analyzing eyewitness testimony is always complex. Investigators didn't necessarily doubt Smith's sincerity. He genuinely believed what he saw. But despite looking into Canadian border crossings and local registries, they could never substantiate the sighting.
It remains a tantalizing, frustrating anomaly. Was the offender moving her across international borders, living a transient life? Or is this a classic case of false memory syndrome where a well-meaning citizen conflates a similar green truck and a similar-looking pregnant woman with a high-profile news story?
It's impossible to say for sure, but the search absolutely did not end in the 90s. Let's fast forward to the modern era, specifically to the investigative landscape of 2026. Law enforcement today is utilizing tools and forensic strategies that would have sounded like pure science fiction to the detectives working the case in 1991.
The technological leap is staggering. Today, the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, commonly known as VICAP, is deeply embedded in the case.
VICAP is an incredibly sophisticated database that aggregates behavioral data, timelines, and forensic evidence from disparate local jurisdictions across the country.
They are actively cross-referencing advanced DNA profiles extracted from unidentified Jane Doe's human remains that have been discovered across the Midwest over the last 35 years. They are utilizing familial DNA tracing, uploading the genetic markers of Angie's surviving family members into genealogical databases, hoping for a match that might finally locate her remains.
If you're looking at the digital forensic side of things, it's equally fascinating. Investigators are currently utilizing advanced digital reconstruction techniques. They aren't just using old pencil sketches anymore.
No, they've meticulously recreated the water scene decal, that specific jumping base based on witness descriptions, and digging into period-accurate aftermarket truck accessory catalogs from the late 80s and early 90s.
And they are deploying these high-definition digital recreations strategically. They are blasting them across targeted social media networks and niche online communities, forums dedicated to vintage truck restorations, retro automotive detailing, and rural Missouri history groups.
The psychological goal is to trigger a latent memory. They are hoping a retired auto body worker, an old scrapyard manager, or just a former neighbor sees that specific fish and suddenly remembers, wait a minute, the guy down the county road used to have that exact decal on his old Ford back in 91, right before he suddenly scraped it off and sold the truck.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
I think, here's where the speculative theories take over.
Exactly. While the physical and digital search for evidence continues, the speculative investigation, the attempt to truly understand the who and the why of this crime, has generated several incredibly compelling and terrifying theories. Let's start with the most foundational profiling theory, the random abduction, or the crime of opportunity.
In behavioral analysis, a crime of opportunity occurs when a predatory offender's path randomly intersects with a highly vulnerable target, and the environmental factors facilitate a low-risk attack. Consider the geography of the food barn parking lot. It was deserted late at night, but it was also located within a very short driving distance to Highway 7, which is a major regional thoroughfare.
So under this theory, this filthy bearded man isn't a local resident at all. He's just a transient individual driving through the night. Maybe he's a long-haul trucker, maybe he's under the influence of narcotics, or maybe he's just an opportunistic monster looking for a victim.
He pulls off the highway into Clinton, cruises through the dark town, and spots a young woman bathed in the bright fluorescent light of a payphone booth, entirely isolated. She is essentially a beacon in the dark.
He circles the lot, assesses the risk, realizes there are no immediate witnesses or police cruisers nearby, creates his flashlight pretense, and strikes.
It is an entirely plausible, albeit terrifying scenario. Highly mobile, violent criminals hunt exactly this way, utilizing the highway system to quickly distance themselves from the jurisdiction of the crime. However, this leads us directly into the second major avenue of investigative speculation, the serial offender link.
Many seasoned investigators and criminal profilers have long theorized that Angela Hammond was not an isolated random victim, but rather part of a distinct cluster of abductions in the region that occurred in early 1991. This geographic cluster is sometimes grimly referred to in true crime circles as the Missouri Triangle.
Let's lay out the timeline and the geography of this triangle, because the overlaps are hard to ignore. 3 months before Angie was taken, on January 19th, 1991, a 42-year-old woman named Trudy Darby was abducted from the rural convenience store where she worked in Max Creek, Missouri.
Much like Angie's case, there was a direct witness element. Trudy noticed a suspicious man loitering outside the store and actually called her son on the phone for help.
By the time her son arrived, just 10 minutes later, the store was empty. 2 days later, her remains were found near a local riverbank. She had been brutally murdered.
The timeline accelerates from there. Just a month after Trudy Darby's murder, and roughly a month before Angie Hammond's abduction, another woman vanished under eerily similar circumstances. On February 28, 1991, 30-year-old Cheryl Ann Kenny disappeared after finishing her night shift at a convenience store in Nevada, Missouri.
Geographically, Nevada is about 70 miles from Max Creek, and Clinton sits right in that same general regional web, forming a rough triangle. Cheryl Ann Kenny has never been found.
You look at that data. 3 women, 3 small rural Missouri towns, 3 abductions occurring from isolated, artificially lit commercial areas late at night, all compressed within a 100-day window. It is almost impossible for an investigator not to look for a connective tissue.
Law enforcement absolutely dedicated resources to finding that connection. In the case of Trudy Darby, an intense investigation eventually led to the arrest and conviction of 2 half-brothers, Marvin Chaney and Jesse Rush. Naturally, speculation immediately flared that these brothers might be responsible for the other 2 disappearances as part of a regional crime spree.
However, despite extensive interrogations and forensic searches, no evidence ever linked Chaney and Rush to Cheryl Ann Kenny or Angela Hammond. Furthermore, the modus operandi, the specific methods used in the crimes, didn't quite align.
Right. The Hammond abduction involved a highly specific suspect vehicle and a brazen, real-time public attack that didn't match the brothers' known behavioral profile.
So if the half-brothers didn't take Angie, who did? That brings us to the heavy hitters in the realm of serial killer speculation. First, you have Kenneth McDuff. He was a notoriously brutal Texas serial killer who was actually known to be hiding out in Kansas City, Missouri, which is just an hour or so drive from Clinton around the time of Angie's abduction.
He was known to be a vicious, opportunistic predator who targeted vulnerable women.
McDuff is an objectively terrifying figure in American criminal history, but federal investigators eventually cleared him of involvement in the Hammond case. Through toll records and verified witness statements, they established sightings of him elsewhere on the night of April 4th.
While his crimes were monstrous, the specific details of the Clinton abduction simply didn't align with his verified timeline.
But then there is the specter of Larry Dwayne Hall. If you study true crime, that name carries an immense amount of dark weight. Hall is a highly suspected serial killer who has claimed responsibility for kidnapping and murdering dozens of young women across the American Midwest throughout the 1980s and 1990s.
Although authorities have only been able to definitively prove a fraction of his terrifying claims.
Hall is an incredibly compelling suspect for several distinct reasons. First, he operated extensively within the state of Missouri. He was a deeply committed Civil War reenactor who traveled the region's highways constantly, giving him an encyclopedic knowledge of rural backroads.
Second, his victimology matches perfectly. He specifically targeted young, petite women.
And most chillingly, during a series of interviews, he once confessed to a writer that he had buried 5 women in the Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri.
That specific detail is where the speculation catches fire. He allegedly claimed 3 of those buried women were from Springfield, which has led many to suspect he was deeply involved in the infamous Springfield 3 disappearance of 1992, and he stated that the other 2 women were from small rural towns in Missouri whose names he couldn't remember.
Could those 2 unnamed women be Cheryl Ann Kenny and Angela Hammond? It is a haunting possibility that profilers have debated for years.
Furthermore, if you examine the composite sketch generated by the Clinton police, which was based on Rob Schaefer's brief but intense observation of the bearded man with glasses under the parking lot lights, and you place that sketch directly next to Larry Dwayne Hall's booking photo from that exact era, the facial resemblance is undeniably uncanny.
The structure, the facial hair, the glasses, it is a genuinely disturbing visual match.
I hear what you're saying about the physical match, but I have to push back hard on the Larry Hall theory because there is a massive, glaring inconsistency that we cannot ignore.
a vehicle.
Exactly. Larry Hall famously and notoriously drove vans. He utilized heavily customized windowless vans that acted as mobile holding cells in killing chambers. He did not drive pickup trucks. And he certainly wasn't known to drive a conspicuous two-tone green Ford F-150 with a giant glowing fish painted on the back window.
That is a completely fair and vital point of friction. In the discipline of criminal profiling, a vehicle is rarely just transportation. It is often a functional extension of the offender's psychological signature. Hall required the enclosed space of a van to execute his specific crimes.
Switching from a customized secure van to a highly conspicuous open cab pickup truck would be a massive, illogical behavioral deviation for an organized killer like Hall.
But couldn't he have just borrowed or stolen the truck for that specific trip? If his van was in the shop, a predator still needs to hunt, right?
It is possible, yes. Predators do adapt when forced. However, stealing a highly recognizable local farm truck, executing a brazen abduction in a lit parking lot, and then miraculously disposing of that specific truck without a trace requires a level of luck and local logistical knowledge that doesn't cleanly fit Hall's transient profile. The vehicle mismatch remains a significant hurdle for investigators trying to definitively pin the Hammond case on him.
Which brings us to a theory that completely bypasses the serial killer profile. A theory that is so mind-bending, so seemingly cinematic, that it didn't even see the light of day until a massive investigative breakthrough in 2021. We are talking about the mistaken identity theory involving a regional narcotics ring.
What's fascinating here is how a completely stagnant cold case can suddenly violently intersect with an entirely different, highly complex criminal underworld. In 2021, on the 30th anniversary of the abduction, the Clinton Police Department held a press conference and revealed a stunning new piece of evidence to the public.
They disclosed the existence of a highly confidential, incredibly threatening letter that had been sitting in an evidence file.
Let me set the stage for how this letter came to exist. Back in 1991, there was an individual, we will refer to him as Cyril, to align with the investigative reporting, who was actively working as a confidential informant for federal and state law enforcement.
His inside testimony had recently been instrumental in tearing down a major, highly dangerous narcotics manufacturing and distribution ring operating in the Ozarks region.
When you dismantle an organization like that, retaliation isn't just a possibility. It is a guaranteed looming threat.
And that retaliation materialized in the form of a physical document. It was a classic, terrifying cut-and-paste ransom-style letter, meticulously assembled from magazine clippings to avoid handwriting analysis. The letter was incredibly specific. It addressed the informant, Cyril, not just by name, but by his highly classified, court-issued identification number.
It referenced his estranged wife by her specific name. And then it delivered the core threat. The letter read, "We know where your foxy daughter is at. She will see us soon."
And what was the name of the confidential informant's daughter? Her name is Angela. And where did the informant's daughter Angela currently reside at that time? She lived in Clinton, Missouri.
The coincidences are already staggering, but the single detail that elevates this from a creepy anomaly into a massive investigative breakthrough is the postmark on the envelope.
The threatening letter was processed and postmarked on April 4th, 1991. That is the exact same day that Angela Hammond was violently abducted from the payphone in Clinton.
When you look at those data points, the narrative basically writes itself. A dismantled drug ring, or a cartel, hires an enforcer, a hitman, to kidnap the informant's daughter in Clinton as an act of leverage or brutal revenge.
The enforcer drives into town looking for a target named Angela. He spots a young woman at a payphone. Maybe he overhears her say her name to her fiancé on the receiver. Or maybe she just broadly matches the physical description he was given.
He executes the abduction only to realize later, perhaps hours or days down the road, that he's committed the ultimate tragic error. He kidnapped the completely wrong Angela.
It sounds exactly like the plot of a high-tension thriller. But as investigators, we have to apply rigorous critical thinking to the logistics of this scenario. While the statistical improbability of the name, the location, and the exact date all aligning is staggering, the actual mechanical execution of the hitman theory is incredibly messy and contradictory.
You mean the truck, right? If you are a professional criminal syndicate organizing a targeted kidnapping for leverage against a federal informant, you do your homework. You surveil the target. You know her home address, her daily schedule, her vehicle.
You don't just send a guy to drive aimlessly around a town of 5,000 people at midnight, spot a pregnant woman at a random payphone, and think, yep, that must be the Angela we want. I'll just grab her right here.
Exactly. A professional enforcer would not execute a sloppy, high-risk, real-time abduction in a well-lit commercial parking lot without positively, undeniably identifying the target first. Furthermore, we come back to the paradox of the vehicle.
Why would an organized cartel hitman be driving a loud, aging, bright green Ford pickup truck with a giant fish painted on the back window? That is the exact opposite of a stealth operational vehicle. It draws the eye. It invites police scrutiny. It is entirely memorable. The vehicle profile screams local, eccentric, or rural drifter, not professional cartel operative.
I hear that, but let me throw a wrench in the logic. What if the enforcer was brought in from out of state and they specifically stole a local beat-up farm truck precisely because it acts as camouflage in a rural Missouri town? Nobody looks twice at a dirty F-150 out there. It blends in perfectly until the moment the crime is committed, and then it can be easily jumped or destroyed because it has no paper trail back to the cartel.
That is a solid counterargument, and it highlights why the police released the letter in 2021. They cannot rule it out. We are left with this maddening, irreconcilable contradiction. The confidential informant existed. The letter is a physical reality. The postmark date is an undeniable fact. The threat was genuine.
But the physical execution of the crime feels entirely disjointed from the sophisticated profile of the individuals who offered that letter. Is it a colossal, heartbreaking coincidence of the universe? Or is there a dark connective tissue between the drug ring and the green truck that we simply haven't discovered yet?
That is the pure agony of the Angela Hammond case. The evidence points forcefully in wildly different directions, from transient drifters to prolific serial killers to cartel hitmen, and yet at the dead center of it all is the heartbreaking reality of a broken car transmission.
Let's examine that transmission because structurally it is the most devastating element of the entire narrative. Rob Schaefer did absolutely everything right in a completely impossible situation. He reacted instantly. He did not freeze. He ran directly toward the danger. He utilized his knowledge of the town's grid to intercept the suspect vehicle in real time. He was physically right there.
It is a devastating, crystal clear example of how fragile human life and destiny truly are. We desperately want to believe that major life events, especially tragedies, are shaped by grand designs or elaborate criminal masterminds. But so often they pivot entirely on microscopic, aggressively mundane mechanical failures.
A slightly worn out gear tooth, a rush of adrenaline causing a hand to slam a gear shift a fraction of an inch too far into the housing. If Rob's transmission holds together for just 5 more minutes, he catches that truck on the highway, he rams it. He potentially saves her life. He alters the trajectory of his entire existence.
Instead, that microscopic mechanical failure becomes a lifelong, insurmountable anchor of guilt. The butterfly effect of that one, panic, forcefully shifted gear, altered the destiny of multiple lives permanently. He was forced to sit there in the dark on Highway 7, completely helpless, while the engine roared and the wheels refused to turn. It is the literal manifestation of a nightmare where you try to run, but your legs won't move.
Which brings us to the profound psychological trauma of this event, not just for the victim who was taken, but for the survivor who was left behind. We have to recognize the unique horror of auditorily witnessing a crime. Rob wasn't just informed by police that his fiancée was missing hours later. He heard it happen. He heard the escalating fear in her voice as she meticulously described the man. He heard the scream. He heard the violent, desperate physical struggle against the plastic phone booth. He heard the cold, indifferent voice of the abductor.
It is a distinctly modern kind of psychological trauma. Being auditorily present for extreme violence, but being physically removed from any capability to stop it. The brain struggles to process the disconnect between the sensory input and the physical reality. And then, the inevitable survivor's guilt sets in.
We know from extensive interviews with Angela's mother, Marcia, that Rob carried a crushing, suffocating weight for decades. He had made a promise to take care of her, to protect his new family. And even though he did absolutely everything humanly possible, even though he risked his own life to chase down a violent predator in the dark, the undeniable fact that he failed to bring her home tormented his psyche.
It is a completely irrational response logically, but an entirely understandable human response emotionally. He felt he failed his fundamental duty as a partner and a father. And exploring that guilt highlights another deeply baffling aspect of this investigation, the complete mystery of the direct witness case.
This is perhaps the most frustrating element for law enforcement. This is not a case where someone vanished from their bed in the middle of the night and wasn't reported missing for 3 days, giving the offender a massive head start. This is a case with a direct, real-time witness. Ribe was on the phone as the abduction occurred.
The local police were notified within 15 minutes of this struggle. There was a detailed physical description of the suspect. There was a highly specific, undeniably unique vehicle description. Independent witnesses corroborated seeing the truck at the scene.
And yet, despite all of those massive, immediate investigative advantages, the case remains entirely unsolved for over 35 years. It forces us to confront the terrifying, fleeting nature of forensic evidence. A predator doesn't need a 3-day head start. They only need a split-second advantage. Once they clear the immediate perimeter of the parking lot, once they hit the dark expanse of a regional highway with 100 different intersecting, unlit dirt roads, they can erase a human being from the earth.
All the composite sketches and vehicle descriptions in the world do not matter if the physical entity simply disappears into the vastness of the American landscape before the sun comes up.
So what does this all mean? When we step back from the timeline, the 1,600 registered trucks, the familial DNA databases, and the serial killer speculations, what is the true legacy of April 4th, 1991?
It is a legacy of permanent, devastating echoes. The impact of a violent crime does not end when the police tape is taken down from the phone booth. It radiates outward, infecting generations of a community.
Rob Schaefer eventually had to move away from Clinton, trying desperately to build a new life, but forever carrying the heavy ghost of that night, the auditory echo of her voice screaming his name through the window of a speeding truck.
And the family. Angela's mother, Marcia, spent the rest of her life agonizing over the vast unknown. She channeled her grief into action, forming support groups with other mothers of missing children across the Midwest. She gave tireless interviews. She kept the flame of hope and media attention alive for 3 decades, praying for a breakthrough.
But tragically, Marcia passed away in 2021 without ever getting a single answer. She died not knowing what happened to her vibrant, pregnant daughter. That single, terrifying phone call became a permanent echo in the lives of everyone who loved her. The ringing never really stopped.
As we close this exploration, I want to leave you with a chilling final thought to mull over. Think about how the rapid evolution of communication technology fundamentally changes our physical vulnerability. In 1991, to reach out and connect with the person she loved, Angela had to physically anchor herself to a public payphone. She had to stand in a single, artificially illuminated spot in the dark, literally tethered by a metal cord, making her a stationary, highly visible sitting duck for a predator circling in the shadows.
It is a profound observation. The technology of the era explicitly required her to be exposed to the elements and to the environment.
Today, we carry our phones in our pockets. We have GPS tracking, emergency SOS features, and the illusion of instant communication from anywhere on the globe. But does that illusion of constant, invisible connection actually make us any safer from someone who is violently determined to do us harm? Or have the predators simply evolved their methods to bypass the digital safety net we believe we hold in our hands?
For years, a young woman lived unidentified, known only as Smurfette Jane Doe. Her story would reveal decades of captivity and abuse before her true identity was finally restored. Next time, we examine the heartbreaking case of Peggy Johnson,